Welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Ray Major. I'm the CEO of Halo Business Intelligence, and I have with me today Nate Weaver, who is my engagement manager, and he's in charge of implementing for all of our clients. I'm very excited to talk about this particular topic, which is successfully helping your clients crawl, run, and walk through BI implementation, primarily because BI is such a broad and very type of a discipline. It's very important that we have methodologies when we do these types of implementations. What I'd like to go over in the next hour or so and help you learn is why 80% of BI implementations fail. And we'd also like to cover how to ensure that there are successful BI implementations. And we want to develop a framework for assessing a company's BI maturity. So we've developed one here at Halo BI, and I'd like to share that with you so that you can see how we do that. And also how to create long-term successful engagements with your customers. Just one quick slide about who Halo Business Intelligence is. Well, what we do is we empower human intelligence within companies. That's really what our structure is. That's what we're trying to do. And we work with lots of different companies. Many of them you've heard of, and a lot of them you probably haven't. But what we do is we pride ourselves in bringing together data that's inherently disordered. So that all the information exists in all of these various different places, and we try to make sense out of what is inherently nonsense, which is really all of these bits and bytes of numbers. And the way that we do that is that we wrap the Microsoft stack. We aggregate multiple data sources, but on top of that, we help cleanse the data also so that you're looking at correct data when you're making your analytical decisions. We present one version of the truth to our customers, and we do that in traditional dashboards, reports, alerts, maps, and analytics. And then we distribute it to the entire business ecosystem, which is something a little bit different than a lot of other vendors do, and we'll talk about that in detail later. We have about 350 customers in North America, or sorry, globally, 150 of those in North America. We're headquartered in San Diego, California, and we've got offices in New Zealand, Australia, Europe, and Asia. And we've won Gartner Awards twice now, and we're very proud of that. The fundamental thing that we look at when we try to understand what BI is we look at what really is a business. And a business, I will challenge you, is that it really is just a collection of decisions. So businesses, you hire people within businesses to make decisions. And each one of these people are making hundreds of decisions on your behalf every day. So whether or not they go in the morning and they decide that they're going to answer their email, or they go in and they decide that they're going to work on a specific PowerPoint presentation or not, all of these decisions impact your business. If you were to take the people who are in any company, for instance, and you remove them from that company and you replace them with the same number of random people off the street, you would not have the same business, because those people will be making different decisions. The human intelligence within a company is the most important asset that a company has, because it's those people working together that really is the business. And so it's a collection of all of these decisions that these people are making in conjunction with each other that really defines what a business is. Now, a business, if you take on average on the low side that you're making 500 decisions per day, if you had a small company with 100 people, you're looking at about 10 million decisions per year that drive your business. Okay? And if you think about it, the whole point of BI is to be able to make more better decisions than bad decisions. And that's really what moves the needle in terms of being a successful business or not. A business that makes more correct decisions is going to be more profitable than a business that makes fewer correct decisions. And so that's what BI is trying to do at its very crux, is to empower the people to make these decisions correctly. When you look at the BI audience within a company, this is what Peter Drucker called the knowledge worker. These are people who use information and their brains to make the business decisions. Typically, they spend somewhere between 15 and 30% of their work time actively searching for information so that they can make better decisions. And what happens is that less than 50% of the time, these searches are successful. So what ends up happening is that they're making decisions based upon their best guess or the knowledge that they have, but they're not making it based upon the data that may reside within the company that would help drive the better decisions. So then the question really to me is, why is this whole BI, why is it such an area where people are spending so much tremendous amounts of money? And what we run into is something that I call the BI paradox. BI has tremendous promises, and this is a $10 million question. If you think about an average AX customer implementation, those customers are probably about $350 million in revenue. And if they can do BI right, BI is worth tens of millions of dollars to them in terms of value that they can bring to the table. So BI promises returns that are up to 4 times the industry average. So these figures come from an Aberdeen study that show that those companies that have implemented BI successfully have 34% increase year over year in terms of operating cash flow. They have 42% increase in operating profits, 41% increase in organic revenue growth. These are type of numbers that most companies would die for. And the way that they're doing is that they're empowering those people that I talked about earlier with the right data. They're metrics-driven companies that can use the data to make better business decisions. Over 40% of these companies have 40% year-over-year increase in sales pipeline because they can measure their funnel. They understand how leads are converted into deals, and that's nearly triple the industry average. And they have more than double the industry average on marketing investment because they can measure the marketing campaigns they're doing. So there's tremendous value in BI if you can get BI right. But BI reality is something completely different from what BI promises. BI reality is that 70 to 80% of BI projects fail. And this statistic comes from a report that Gartner did, I think, in 2012. And the main reasons that BI fails fall into a couple of categories, and these are things that we've heard as we've done implementations for our customers. But communication is the biggest one, and that's something that Gartner also identified as one of the biggest ones. But I'm sure that you also, having talked with customers, get these type of responses. So in terms of communication, the BI project was an IT success, but it's a total business failure because nobody uses it. So IT successfully implemented it. We pull the data together, we put dashboards on top of it, and yet nobody's using it. Okay, and that's a lot of that has to do with communication of what the business really needs and what IT really implements. Scheduling is another problem. How many times have you talked to a customer where they're 4 weeks out from launching and they realize that the project has now slipped another 3 or 4 or 5 months or maybe even longer than that, and that they're probably going to only implement a phase 1 out of what was going to be this Nirvana BI system, and they would be happy if 40% of it was actually implemented. And as you're doing this, costs continue to be incurred for these companies who are trying to do this. Data quality is another one. Companies start trying to implement BI, and as soon as they start to have some visibility into their data, what they end up seeing is that on average 30 to 50% of their data contains some type of errors. And when that happens, all of a sudden all of the results become suspect that come out in the dashboard. So when you put numbers in front of an executive that's pulling straight from the ERP system, for instance, and they look at it and they intuitively know that it's wrong, the first time you do that, they've lost complete confidence in the BI system. Not necessarily the data. They believe that the BI system is wrong because those numbers are suspect, and it's really the dashboard they're looking at that it's presenting those numbers as suspect. The dashboard is neutral of the data, but they're really what ends up happening is you lose confidence in the entire project. Again, that goes back to why a lot of these fail. And finally, one version of the truth. There are so many companies, and probably most companies, that do not have internal agreement on how to measure different variables like sales. So if I'm interested in doing a sales forecast, or I'm interested in understanding what my sales were last quarter, if we can't agree on how we're going to measure that, then the BI doesn't work because everybody's looking at a different version of the truth. So if we could somehow fix these 4 bullet points, what we could do is help reduce that 70 to 80% failure rate, and that's what we try to do. What ends up happening, and I want to talk a little bit about what the problem is, at least the way that we see it. What I see the problem being is that most companies approach BI as an engineering problem that requires some type of software platform or package to solve that business problem. So it's really an engineering problem. So they're saying, oh, we need BI, so we have to go out and we have to buy a BI system and we have to implement it. The problem is that that's not how BI works. BI projects really resemble software development projects more than they do software rollout projects. And so, for instance, if you're upgrading your ERP system, that's an engineering problem. That's hardware, that's software, that's we got to get the new versions on there, everybody needs access to it, and you can tell when you start it and you can tell when you end it. It's very easy to measure what the success was there. But when I talk about this being more like software development, if you think about it, back in the 80s and in the 70s, all software was built using a waterfall methodology. And the waterfall methodology led to probably 70 to 80% failure rates when it came to software development projects also. And the reason that BI is different is that the end users, the questions that they have of a BI system really comes from a place that we call human intelligence. And these are psychological and sociological issues that we're dealing with. They're not the technical BI problems like how do I link to this particular database, how do I make a graph from this particular information. The psychological and sociological problems that we're trying to solve are really tied to how people think when they're trying to solve those 500 business problems that I talked about earlier. And so I keep asking the question of why from the data. So for instance, if I'm looking at a report and one of the numbers looks bad, then what I want to do is I want to understand why that is. So I might want to drill into that particular data. I want to understand what the root cause is of that particular problem. And that's where BI becomes important to me. It's not just about visualizing the data. It's really about me being able to interact with the data and make come up with the answers that I need to drive the business. And that's really coming from the human intelligence part, not the business intelligence part. So if you took an agile development methodology like you would find in software development and you applied it to implementing BI, you can reduce the project failure rate to probably under 20%. And I'd like to show you some statistics that we've gathered on how that actually works. When you take a look at a typical deployment, it looks something like this. It's very linear for BI, and it still is even today. But what happens is up front, there's a planning process. And so the company gets together, they figure out what business problems they want, they put together a project plan, they put together specs, and it takes them several months to do this, and they end up with this big document saying this is what we need for BI. What ends up happening then is we go and we do the data construction, SSIS, SSAS, all the different packages are used to construct the data. We test that system. There's unplanned work that has to be done. The clients need to accept that. We do the implementation, then we start to put dashboards on it, roll it out, we deploy it 18 months later. Okay, this is a typical customer would look something like that. If you take a look at the skill set and the number of hours that it required to implement it, it really is a tremendous amount of time invested. What happens is as you start rolling out the BI project, you have to start adding more and more skills where you may start out with a project lead and a couple of people defining some specifications. Very quickly, you start having to add developers and subject matter experts and business analysts to the team. And you end up burning a tremendous amount of time. And so in this particular company that we worked with, it took them about 2,900 hours to do an implementation, and it required a dozen or so or more skill sets. Okay, so it's not a one-to-one correlation. There may be a person who has more than one skill set, but it required an entire team of people to do this implementation. Okay, what ends up happening is that you're burning a lot of money internally to do this. So where a company might buy a $100,000 piece of software and they figure they're going to spend $20,000, $30,000 to do the implementation, what ends up happening is that over the life of the project, until it gets actually deployed, you're looking at burning like $250,000 in this particular case. Okay. So if you use a rapid development environment, if you think about this more as an agile business problem rather than looking at it waterfall, and you break down the business question, what I'd like to do is to show you how much money you can actually save the company and how you can ensure that these companies are going to be successful in their rollout. Human beings think in small chunks, in a very linear way, and so what ends up happening is that even if I have 70 pages of specs of all of these metrics that I need to measure to run my business, the truth is I can only work on one of those things at a time. And so what happens is that I'm going to be cycling through something like this as I work out each one of those KPIs, for instance. So there's a question, right? One of the questions is that we need some kind of insight into our sales estimate. And if you take a look at the business leaders or the sales managers, they're going to say, right, I need to see my data by region and by rep, and I need to understand what the year-to-date totals are, and I need to know the percentages of plan that each one of my sales reps is at. That's my business problem. Okay. So again, this is that human intelligence and my psychological question, which is I need to be able to understand what's going on. I don't just need the data. I need to be able to drill into it. Well, typically the way that we would calculate something like this is great. Okay. Well, tell me, what is total sales? Well, total sales can be calculated. You know, I don't want to use invoice clients. Or I want to use invoice clients. I don't want to use the ones that are closed in Salesforce. Here's the formula. So we then design the metrics. So we have the business question. Okay. Then the next thing we do is we design metrics that are going to help us understand that business metric. Okay. Then what we do is we develop and calculate, and we start to visualize the data. So let's use a bar chart, okay, rather than a line chart. This allows me to see everybody and how they're doing by region. And now let's add a column that shows percent of plan. So we start working on developing this metric. And then what we do then is we validate these results, right? So we take a look and we see that all the sales figures are in alignment with expectations. Everybody is in agreement that this is the right data that we need to be looking at, okay? So by doing that, what you do is you end up answering this one question, okay? And now, in the case of a waterfall model, we would have to do this 100 times or 500 times or once for each one of the metrics that we would be actually looking at, okay? So when you take a look at using a tool like the one that we provide, which is Halo Source, one of the things that we can do is we can simply reduce the amount of time it takes to build the data warehousing and to do the dashboarding. So what ends up happening is that instead of taking 18 months, we can do that in half the time, okay? The important thing here is that when you have a long rollout, the specs change, the people change, technology changes, the business changes. And so what ends up happening is no matter what is identified at the beginning as this is what we need for BI, inevitably it's going to shift by the time you get to the end of the project, and it's not going to exactly meet the mark. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how do we shorten this. So one way to go from crawling to walking in terms of BI is to shorten that amount of time that it takes to deploy these things for customers, okay? And if you apply a rapid development environment to the whole thing, what ends up happening is that you can now do things in small sprints, like you would with agile development. So instead of taking a year to get the first piece of information out to a customer, what happens is that in one cycle, which could be 2 weeks or it could be a month, we can go through the entire process of taking the data, of defining what the business problem is, of building the metric, and then pushing it, validating it, and pushing it out to the customer. And when we do that in a small cycle, what ends up happening is that the customer starts to be able to realize value from the BI system much sooner, because after that first cycle, they will have essentially a dashboard that is tied to their data that they can use in a very specific department. For instance, it would be sales. The next one we would build then is finance, and then we'd build one for procurement. Okay, so that's the way that you would run in terms of implementing a BI strategy. Okay, This next slide just kind of shows the skills that are necessary to implement BI projects. And using a traditional BI implementation, you see the list and the approximate salaries of these people who are on the team that is putting together this traditional BI platform. And like I said, this goes, could be going for a year, year and a half or more before it gets implemented. And using a rapid development environment, especially if you have a tool that can simplify the entire data construction area, you can have far fewer resources on the project. What happens is that using a rapid development environment, you can probably cut the time in half. And obviously, there's a high return on investment by just being able to get BI out to the customer sooner. But what's more interesting here is that the cost is probably 70% less than it would be. And that's because as you've got this big team and you just continue to pay them month after month to do the implementation, those costs really add up. So where in a traditional model, you would be probably spending $250,000 to do an implementation internally, or a customer would. With a rapid development environment, you can do it for a fraction of that cost. Okay. What I'd like to do now is hand it over to Nate Weaver, who is going to go through a couple of case studies where we've used rapid development and successfully helped customers move from crawling to running with their data.
Thank you, Ray. So one thing I'm going to do is talk about two very different case studies. Both case studies are current Halo customers that previously had failed BI projects. Now, as the engagements manager, one thing that I get the pleasure of doing is following our customers from the pre-sale side through implementation all the way up to 3, 6, 9 month health checks to understand if the project is going as well as we hoped, and to understand if the customer has any additional requirements or training initiatives that they maybe require. So the first case study, failed Hyperion S-based BI implementation, and the CIO of this organization, very large customer, $2+ billion AX customer, full enterprise, had tried for 2 to 3 years to make Hyperion work. He's worked with Hyperion in his past. He brought it to the new organization. That pushed into its 4th year at a cost of almost $1 billion, or I'm sorry, $1 million, several $100,000. And what they realized was that, okay, it's time to shelf this, and we need to go with more of an agile process. So after talking to him just a couple of weeks ago, the glowing success, post-rapid development environment implementation at only a 3-week process, they were successfully up and running at a fraction of the cost. User adoption is through the roof. Over 200 people logging in to the BI platform now, and grew their user base by 10-fold. So where they were struggling to have even 20 people logging in to look at this very expensive Hyperion S-based implementation, they now have over 200. The next is a very, very different company, much smaller, very small company, a very lean IT staff. What they were looking for was out-of-the-box analytics for Dynamics AX. But what they quickly realized through their failed implementation was that one size doesn't quite fit all. So after 1 year of an unsuccessful BI rollout, they were looking for an alternative. So again, if this out-of-the-box analytics isn't working, what was really the problem? Well, there were really 3 major things that jumped out. One, these out-of-the-box analytics did not lend themselves to the business processes set forth by that company. It just simply did not fit their environment. Second problem, the BI toolset could not be easily customized or modified to fit the way that they ran their business. The third was it was too difficult for their user base to use moving forward. So they were having a rapidly dropping user base. End users weren't happy with it. They were reverting back to Excel and other means of doing their own reporting. So again, failed implementation. When they came to us and we started talking about a rapid development environment, of course, they were a little bit jaded about this quote-unquote out-of-the-box analytics. Well, a successful out-of-the-box analytics capability should not only get them up and running very quickly, but also be easily modified to, again, fit those business processes. So using a rapid development environment, they were able to aggregate these multiple sources of data, which you can see on your screen, 8, 9 sources of data. Of course, they had AX, but they also have several departments, each with their own internal software initiatives, anything from HR systems to budgeting and planning to manufacturing. And after, again, successful rapid development environment, 4 weeks, total implementation, 4 successful cubes up and running, very happy, very vocal customer.